Hello and welcome to Bespoke Unit. I'm CP and in this video we'll be reviewing the Oliva Monticello. First of all, this review was conducted using the Bespoke Unit Cigar Formula, a quantifiable review matrix that you can use at home. Simply look in the description, you'll see a link which will take you to a guide which will teach you how to use it, as well as provide you with a blank copy to download and print off. As well, these cigars were stored in the Boveda acrylic humidor that you can see behind me for a period of 3 weeks using 69% Boveda packs as well as a Boveda butler to monitor them regularly. This ensures that we properly acclimate the reviews and they are ready for a fair evaluation. The Oliva Monticello is a Holt exclusive. It can be found only on the Holt's website or in the Ashton Lounge in Philadelphia. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to pick up an Oliva Monticello, and for that reason, it's not a very well-known blend. So its assembly takes place at the Tabacalera Oliva de Nicaragua, or Tabulosa. From now on, I imagine they'll be made at the Tabulosa 1 factory, which was built in January 2020. The method is accordion style, hecho a mano. The wrapper is a Nicaraguan Maduro and the binder and filler are Nicaraguan as well. This makes it a Nicaraguan Puro. Outside that, unfortunately, I don't have any more information about the leaves and varieties that we use to construct the cigar. The roll, as you can see on this unsmoked version, is somewhat bumpy but overall straight. You might get a couple of soft spots on the odd cigar. I had a couple that were soft and others that were very consistent. It has a very toothy wrapper with a bumpy texture, and the style is a box press which is quite reminiscent of the Oliva Master Blends 3. But as you can see, these are two Robustos and the Master Blends 3 is slightly larger. That's because this is a 5x50 Robusto and the Master Blends 3 is a 5x54 double Robusto, much like the Serie V. The spring, as I mentioned, is overall quite firm, and on some occasions you may get a couple of soft spots. Its hue has a nice earthy darkness to it, whereas the sheen does project a couple of oils. In terms of veins, so the one I've been smoking was quite rustic in appearance. However, this is much cleaner and has a lovely presentation to it. As for the aromas on the foot, the Monticello delivers a very pungent flavour which consists of cacao, some musky labdanum and some star anise spice. As for the Prelight, you have a very nice draw, and I experienced that on all the cigars that I tested. It gives you a nice relaxed draw, good smoke output, which I'll talk about later, and doesn't really resist too much, but it does give you a little bit, so it doesn't feel like you're sucking in air. The flavours are quite rich, and on the Prelight you had some maple syrup, so quite sweet, syrupy, but aromatic nevertheless, some cinnamon, and some benzoin, which is an incense. It's a resin which is slightly reminiscent of vanilla. It does have a softness to it, but it's otherwise quite warm and quite spicy as well. Going into the first third of the cigar, so it opens up with a great deal of flavour. It's quite complex and verbose throughout the whole cigar, in fact, but the first third is particularly impressive. We're greeted by some slight saltiness, a little bit of sweetness as well. It's dominated by what I would describe as a Brazil nut aroma, but there's also some aromatic in there, so I would liken that to toasted bay leaf. And finally there is a hint of mahogany which adds a fragrant woodiness to the first third. Going into the second third, there's a slight transition somewhere around the halfway point. This is overall quite oaky. The woodiness becomes much more predominant, and you also have the syrupy sensation that you would have picked up on the dry draw, which was the maple syrup as I described earlier, but in this case it's lacking that aromatic sweetness, and I would instead liken it to molasses. And is typical among a number of Oliva cigars. You start to pick out a little bit of black pepper, which is particularly perceptible in the retrohale. The final third continues with the oak. This transitions right down to the nub, but on this occasion, instead of molasses and black pepper, it is going to be much more gourmand or gourmet and consists of cacao nibs, which are particularly dry and fragrant, as well as a hint of espresso coffee bean. The overall complexity of the cigar is quite impressive. Indeed, you do have a rich variety of nuances and different notes that are perceptible through each part of the cigar. Indeed, they come in, they come out. There's many that I haven't noted here, which I had difficulty in fact identifying myself. The mouthfeel is overall very velvety, buttery smooth. You do indeed have a slight creaminess in the texture. As for the astringents, it didn't create any dryness or salivation. In fact, it was perfectly balanced in this sense, which leads me to the palate stimulation, which overall hanged around the front of the tongue throughout most of the cigar and eventually crept back towards the rear of the palate. However, this was very much near the final third and indeed quite close to the nub as well. In terms of the overall life cycle of the cigar, indeed it does have a certain degree of evolution. However, I would have liked a little bit more, especially between the second and final third. While there were a couple of distinctive changes, they weren't as marked as I would have probably hoped, especially in the oak theme becoming quite dominant at the halfway point and all the way to the end. I would have liked there to be a little bit more complexity in that sense. And finally, the finish. This is quite lingering indeed. It does remain on the palate for quite a while, and the residual scent in the room is certainly present for a while. It's not overly pleasant. However, that, for example, if you could compare it to the Oliva Serie V Maduro or the original Oliva Serie V, it is much more fragrant compared to them. As for the overall burn, the draw remained consistent through the entire smoke. Each one I tried didn't offer too much in the way of resistance in the draw. Indeed, this is probably helped by the slight box press finish. As you can see, is not overly round, but it's not square like most box press are. Instead, it's just been pressed on the top without having been too squashed on the sides. The temperature throughout the whole cigar was very cool. There were no heat issues there whatsoever. The ash backbone was quite strong, although that is something that I've noticed to be somewhat inconsistent with these cigars. I've had some that were quite flaky and others that held on very, very nicely. Indeed, I had a really nice stack on this that unfortunately I knocked off by accident, but it probably could have lasted well until this point without any issues. In terms of burn angle, I haven't touched the cigar up at all. There is some waviness to it, but it's nothing that's overly disconcerting. You might not have to touch it up yourself unless you prefer to have a perfectly straight cigar. As for the overall experience of this cigar, the bands are quite reminiscent of the Oliva Serie V line, especially the Melanio with the second band here. Otherwise, it does distinguish itself by having a more rounded shape to it. Instead of a V, you have the letter M, which I presume stands for Monticello, and you have a secondary band with Monticello here as well. The box is quite ornate. It comes in a white box, which is well designed with a cedar lining on the interior. They come in boxes of 20, which leads me on to the value of the cigar. So I actually found this to be quite expensive. The RRP for a single Robusto is $16 or $17, which is quite a bit, considering this is almost $4 more than a Melanio Serie V Maduro. And when you buy them in a box of 20, I think the price will come down to $12 per stick for the Robusto, which is still a fair amount. It comes down to about the same price as a Melanio Maduro single, but again, this isn't the cheapest cigar, especially given that it's an exclusive and not going to be easy to find in other retailers. With regards to the occasion, this is just as versatile as the Oliva Serie V in general. It has a very well displayed band that isn't too ostentatious, it's quite elegant. The flavours of the cigar are complex, yet they could be quite beginner friendly. Being a Maduro cigar, it's not overwhelming, it's not high in body, this is a medium full all the way down. You could certainly enjoy this whether you're wanting to invite some guests over with some friends, or you could take it to a premium cigar lounge without feeling out of place, and it would be great for special occasions. However, if you're going to be dishing out a lot of cigars, this probably might not be the best choice given that it's quite pricey. I would instead opt for one of the original Serie V cigars instead, given that these are going to be a little bit more affordable and equally as versatile in that respect. The final section of our cigar formula is the pairings. Now, this is not scored. This is simply a consideration, something to bear in mind when you're going to be testing the cigar or tasting it for yourself. how would you want to pair it, what kind of accords could you have in mind. It's just an exercise, so don't feel it's gospel in any way. However, I would go for primarily a ribeye steak with this, or char grilled meat, especially on a wood fire. If you can get that nice grilled texture, the crispiness on the outside and nice and red on the inside, this would go remarkably well. Otherwise, you could consider a dark chocolate, something above the 65% in terms of concentration. For instance, Argent Cove is a Nicaraguan artisanal brand that we really like at Bespoke Unit. They produce some great chocolates that will go well with this. Alternatively, another one which I did actually suggest for the Serie V was a pepperoni pizza. The pepperiness of the pizza, as well as the yeastiness of the crust, would blend quite nicely with the flavors of this cigar and extend the experience somewhat. As for beverages, you could obviously go for a bourbon, a scotch, even an Irish whiskey. Try to aim for something with some consistence and some verbose body, something with character, so it would pair well with the cigar. However, I would prefer a cognac in general, especially a fin champagne, which will have some more leathery and spicy notes that would pair well with this cigar. Alternatively, looking at non-alcoholic beverages for a change, I thought would be quite interesting, for instance, here would be a hickory. A hickory drink would have the kind of strength and body of perhaps a coffee, but it offers a more aromatic flavour, which would perhaps pair better with the cigar. Alternatively, I would also suggest honeybush or rooibos tea. That is something that I was actually having when I was tasting one of the previous cigars, and I thought that it paired very nicely. You do have an aromatic and spicy but mild presence in the rooibos tea that goes quite pleasantly with this cigar and helps cleanse the palate for every draw, so that the next one is going to be a new experience altogether. That's all from me today. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on those little bells for notifications. Leave us a comment if you have any questions or queries. And until our next video, head to bespokeunit.com and see all the other lifestyle subjects that we cover. I'm sure there'll be something that you will enjoy. Until next time, take care.